Good morning, Jared here, and Enoch. I don't know how long he's gonna stick around, but for right now, he wants to sit in my lap. Everybody else is still asleep. It is 6:20 on a Sunday morning, and everybody else is still in bed. We woke up and are getting after it. I've had my coffee. You can tell, I think, from Enoch's face that he has not had any coffee. That's what I looked like before I had my first cup of this. Man, coffee. I noticed in looking at YouTube, there's analytics that you can pull up that'll show you what the average duration of views are, how many views your videos are getting, how long most people are watching on average before they click away, and you can also see total watch time for videos. Interesting things to track as I go along, and so far, not a whole lot of likes. I suppose people that click away after 8 minutes and 42 seconds, which is the average view duration, they're not necessarily feeling it, maybe, or they're not thinking about clicking the like button because something came up that interrupted maybe, or they got bored or whatever, and they clicked away. And so that's fine. Maybe as time goes on, more and more people who are really interested in this format take a liking to it. I don't depend on people's likes and dislikes to do this. With my wife, she was watching a cooking show just last night, and she's resting because she just had John, and so we've got a TV in our room, and so she's why not watch some show about is it Chef's Table, I think is what it's called. And anyway, they were doing this one segment or episode focusing on this Brazilian chef. And so he's talking about his culinary journey. And I'm not watching the show. I just kind of popped in to help her, get her something, fold laundry, what have you. Get this guy out of the room because he loves his little brother John a little bit too energetically sometimes, and needs to be carried away so he doesn't hurt him. We're working on the gentleness. He's pretty good. Most of the time it's just very, very gentle. Last night I was holding John, and I kind of put him in place. I was like, hey, do you want to give your brother a kiss? And Enoch just grabbed his face. I was like, it was like a little bit aggressive. Well, anyway, I popped in, cooking show. My wife's watching it, and this Brazilian chef is talking about how initially he was trying to make French food, and high-level chef. He encounters this French chef, and this French chef tells him, you have a real knack for making flavorful food. You've got an instinct for that. You've got a gift. But you're never going to make French food as well as I do, because I'm French, and you're not, and you're Brazilian. And this really bothered this Brazilian chef. And he's, a different looking kind of character besides, and anyway, it looks like he, practices maybe Brazilian jiu-jitsu or some kind of a martial art, because they kept cutting back and forth between, interviewing him and, showing him, living life and going around. And he'd go out with, natives of Brazil and collect fish or wild game or some kind of domesticated animal, and then prepare it in a traditional way. So he's learning from them traditional ways to prepare Brazilian food, and he's incorporating that into his craft as a Brazilian chef. and he's bothered by this comment that this French chef makes, though, about how he's just not going to ever match a French chef making French food. And it's like a foreign language for him. He's speaking with an accent, so to speak, when it comes to his making this food. And so the Brazilian chef, he says, well, if I'm never going to make French food as well as a French chef does, then, maybe I should just make Brazilian food. And I know nobody's going to make Brazilian food as good as I do. I'm Brazilian, and I grew up on Brazilian food, and I could make it fantastic. I just incorporate these principles that I've learned in studying the culinary arts. Incorporate that into how I prepare traditional Brazilian meals, and it'll be original. It'll be something that nobody else is doing. And so he does this, and I guess he starts a restaurant or something. I caught bits and pieces. Wasn't really paying all of my attention to it, but it sounds like he started a restaurant and was he's preparing these Brazilian dishes, and he said the first couple of years nobody came, and I got zero traction. People didn't take me seriously, didn't take Brazilian food seriously. They thought, what is this? This is just a joke. And then at a certain point that changed, because somebody actually tried it, and somebody said, hey man, this is really, you should try this, and boy, I bet he's glad he didn't give up too soon, or get discouraged, just when it wasn't initially successful, because now he's making it. His original idea was a good one, and I'm sure in the course of not being an instant success, that was somewhat liberating. I mean, somewhat motivating to, hey, I need to really make sure my process is good here, and I'm doing everything the best that I possibly can. But there's also a little bit liberating, because it can only go up from here. When you're at the bottom, you can only go up. It can't get worse than no interest. So anyway, that frees you to experiment. That frees you up to try new things. Here I am. I'm 7 minutes and 54 seconds, 55 seconds, and I'm getting closer to this average view duration. And I want to note, this changes by video and by day. And it lags behind a couple of days. So today is Sunday, May 27th, and the most recent day for which I've got data is May 24th, which was Thursday. So this past Thursday. And the average view duration on Thursday was 11 minutes, 47 seconds. On Wednesday, it was 19 minutes and 25 seconds. So, whatever everybody was watching on Wednesday, they enjoyed it, or most of them did, more so. I can also break it down by video. Looks like the average view duration is longest of all my videos so far on the video I did about Jordan Peterson's 12 Simple Rules in the Bible. So that must have gotten some people's interest, peaked. They watched that. There was also one I did on Mother's Day, 14 minutes and 30 seconds. And, so I notice as I'm going along here, it seems like the average view duration is getting longer. That could be, as I'm sharing this to Facebook, some people who've never viewed any of my video blogs, early on, they might click in and they might realize, this isn't my flavor. I don't have time for this. I like Garrett, but I don't have an hour to sit and wait for him to get to his point. Meanwhile, it could be, there's some return viewers who, they watch one video, 15 minutes in, they say, I'm really busy. I didn't schedule time enough in the day to finish watching one of these, but maybe I'll you know, when tomorrow it looks like I've got a 2 or 3 hour gap, maybe I will turn this on in the background or whatever. So then it plays along. It's encouraging to me. It seems like the trend is going in the right direction. The average view duration is getting longer. But I think also one thing I need to be cognizant of is as I'm dealing with important topics, if I come with one really, really important topic that I want to cover in my video, to try and get that in, to plan to mention that early so that most people are catching it before they click out. And you know, that might be difficult. You know, it's not like I've got this already established credibility where you know, people say, hey, yeah, you know, if he advertises, you know, tune in tonight to hear about this, blah, 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 blah. You know, and then you keep telling the audience, well, just wait for it, I'm going to get to it. You know, maybe that's how that works, and that's why people do it, is they get you to watch the entire program because you're waiting for them to talk about that one thing that you actually were interested in. And meanwhile, they sprinkle in all this other stuff that you just don't, you know, about YouTube analytics or, I mean, whatever. But on the one hand, I could really obsess about it and try to fine tune it. But on the other hand, I don't want to go too far on that because I want this to be something that is organic and authentic. I want it to be something that I'm not trying to be someone else. I want to be me. I'm me. God made me to be me. He made you to be you. And there's a particular flavor that is lost when we forgo originality. We forgo, you know, who we are to try and be someone else because we think that's what someone else has to be successful. I don't have enough confidence to believe that I could be successful with what I'm bringing already, with what God's given me. Well, you know, why think that way? You know, God gave that person over there that I'm looking at who's successful a particular set of traits and talents and a certain personality, and that's great. He didn't give everybody those traits and that personality, and we don't have to have those traits and that personality necessarily to be special, unique, and to have a purpose and to you know, and to be successful. I think God makes everybody different. Success may look different for everybody. But it certainly, I don't think it ever really looks like, success doesn't ever really look like being insecure to the point that you don't try or you hide your light under a bushel, as the biblical saying goes. Let your light so shine before all men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven. So, okay, now 13 minutes, 15 seconds, exactly the average view duration for video 10 that I did, the red line on public education. So, now, you know, several people maybe have clicked out, and that's fine, you know. I hope you guys have a good day. Thanks for joining us for a little bit. Now I'm going to get into the list of things that I wanted to talk about. That was my warm-up. This is my second cup of coffee, and this is my first video for the day. And you know, these days I'm doing a couple of videos some days as I'm realizing there's more that needs to be discussed, more that needs to be talked about. And if I have the time, I mean, why not? But you know, first thing on my Word document list here of things that I wanted to cover, Mike Rowe. I saw an interview with Tucker Carlson that he just did where they were talking about safety and how highly prioritized safety is. And Mike Rowe made a remark that would probably get him fired in most oil field jobs, probably many industrial jobs. And he says that he tells his crew when they're filming the various shows that he does, safety third, and he does that to get their attention, and you know, who knows? I mean, I don't know what it's like to work on a micro crew. You know, maybe he's always putting them in harm's way. Maybe they have a high casualty rate. I don't know. It's hard telling. Um, but it's interesting to me that he does make a good point, and that is safety cannot be the first and only concern. But that's all we care about. We don't care about experimentation. We don't care about trying things. We don't care about exploring new possibilities because we're just so afraid of making a mistake. Uh, that's not how America was built. That's not how anything significant or worthwhile gets done ever. And culturally, philosophically, uh, what better way to undermine the leftist program, where the socialists are always anything that they want to get control of, they just run around trying to scare everybody into feeling unsafe about. And not only to feeling unsafe about, let's say guns or global warming or bigotry or whatever, they make you afraid in a helpless sort of a way. In a way that it reminds me of why I don't watch horror movies. I don't like a horror movie. I can watch Saving Private Ryan. I have watched it a couple of times. I can watch Band of Brothers. I can watch these war movies. I can watch Braveheart. I can watch fill in the blank. Just about any war movie. If I haven't seen it, it's probably just because I haven't had the opportunity yet. But even violent, gory, dark war movies don't bother me usually the way that horror movies do on principle. And what I don't like about horror movies is, when the death and the dying and the suffering is, for one thing, pointless, and for another thing, it's presented in a way to make you feel helpless. I don't like that. That bothers me. And I think that's the formula for horror, is that there's something evil and there's nothing that's going to save you from it. Nothing. It doesn't follow the rules of the universe. It doesn't, obviously doesn't follow the rules of right and wrong or basic decency. But there's nothing that's going to save you from this bad man, this evil monster, whatever, that's going to get you. And there's nothing you can do about it. That's awful. But I think that's the way that leftists campaign. That's the way that they run. Is hey, there's something awful that if you don't elect us, is going to happen, or it's going to happen, and we're the only way that you're going to be saved from it. You're too little. You can't manage this. You can't respond effectively to it, but we can do that. And it's interesting to me. I mean, the left is and has been since at least the Vietnam War, anti-war in rhetoric and campaign rhetoric. Certainly, especially when a Republican is in office, then they're anti-war. It's amazing how their tune changes when they get political power. Their hands on the red button. They're ready to go into Libya and take out Gaddafi and laugh and joke about it as they run for president. But if it's a George Bush, then he's a war criminal for going into Iraq and Afghanistan. But they have this anti-war platform in general, because they have painted a narrative by and large of America as being what's wrong with the world, and we need to change and stop being Americans, and we need to apologize like Barack Obama did. He went all over the world and apologized for Americans, and I'm really sorry, guys. We've really offended the rest of the world, and we need to stop that. I'm sorry that we did that, and we've been so powerful and wealthy, and if we have benefited and we've been wealthy and powerful, that must mean that we oppressed others and we deprived them. We couldn't, because that's the liberal narrative, is if one person has wealth, they must have taken it from somebody else. There's no concept of I could plant a fruit tree in my yard and it grows fruit without stealing the fruit from your yard. You know, if you want fruit, why don't you plant your own fruit tree instead of being jealous of my fruit tree and trying to tax my fruit tree at 40%, so that you don't have to plant a fruit tree, you lazy bum. Uh, but the Democrats, they don't think like that. They don't argue like that. They campaign on taxing fruit trees and treating fruit trees like some kind of a dishonest theft on principle. But this idea of big government, the big government needs to save you from whatever bogeyman the leftist politician is presenting in the moment. And they've run out of so many things because of technology, because the free market facilitated, encouraged, fostered the development of refrigeration in grocery stores and automobiles and airplanes. And obviously I understand there's been, federal monies and state monies and government support at critical junctures in the development of various technologies. I understand that, but the biggest incentive to anybody, even going into government, and saying, hey, can I have a grant for this? Or people applying for patents, having a system by which people's intellectual property is recognized and appreciated and rewarded. You start a company, you have a great idea for a product or a service that nobody else is doing. If you want to make Brazilian food, and there's currently nobody even thinking about how they would really like to, I mean, I've never even had Brazilian food, but after watching that little segment, I thought, boy, that's cool. If I had a chance to go to that guy's restaurant versus the French chef who said, you're never going to make French food as well as I do, because we're not French. I mean, I have a choice between the two. I'm going to go try the Brazilian jiu-jitsu chef's. He's got tattoos all over, and he's going around with the tribal people. I'd like to try what it is that he's making that didn't get taken seriously at first. That sounds interesting to me. The leftist view that there's something that the government needs to save you from around every corner. They ran out of the lower order Maslow's hierarchy of needs things, and they've created dependence where they had this Lyndon Baines Johnson declared war on poverty, and actually made things worse by creating dependency. And what it was is it was buying Democratic voters by getting them dependent on the state to where they couldn't imagine life without a welfare check, without food stamps, without WIC, without fill in the blank. And then, what do you know, if you're forced to choose because making over a certain amount of money, you don't any longer qualify for all of these programs, but you're just barely making over the amount, if you work. And now the programs, they had such a value, way more than that little bit more that you just crossed the threshold. That's their standard for whether you qualify. So you have people scaling back and saying, well, I don't want to work too much and then disqualify myself and my family because then, we're worse off actually. I'm not able to put food on the table like I need to without these programs. Even with work, I'm not able to. I'm not going to work hard, and then I'm not going to get ahead, and I'm not going to advance. You've removed the incentive, and all because the government said, hey, there's a bogeyman of hunger, there's a bogeyman of housing, and you can't do anything about it. This is too big of a problem for you. You need the government to step in with other people's money, taxing your neighbor's fruit tree, to come and take care of that. Now, what am I saying? Am I arguing against poor people, hungry people, homeless people being helped? Absolutely not. But I've lived on both sides of this. I have. I mentioned in one of my recent videos that I didn't grow up well off. I've got family that's well off, that started and ran businesses and did very well for themselves financially, and I'm proud of them for that. But I grew up, my parents, they stood up to a corrupt local government official who had the purse strings of the government at his disposal. He was the one who got to choose whether to bless or damn. And in order to qualify for federal money and programs, there's always strings attached. There's always, do this and you qualify. If you do that, then you're disqualified. And this government official was a crook. And from what I understand, he was basically using the power of his position to arbitrarily and capriciously, malevolently drive farmers and ranchers out of business if they didn't do this number and ask how high whenever he said jump and give him the proper amount of deference. And he would just pull it out like a trump card that, hey, I could take your farm away if you upset me. You might want to stay on my good side. Even if you're following all the rules, following all the programs, if this guy can sign off and just fudge this number a little bit, fudge that number a little bit, and say, well, I don't authorize this, I don't approve of that, I'm not going to sign off saying that you met these qualifications, even if you did, then, boy, you're in a pickle. You've accepted that money, and it sounded really nice. It was really going to help you buy that combine you needed. It was going to help you buy the seed that you needed for this year. It was going to help you buy that extra little bit of acreage that you need in order to be, crossing the threshold. You've got all this farm equipment. You got to have a certain amount of acreage in order to support a certain amount of yield in order to justify that equipment. If I had a lawn the size of this room, 10 by 10 or 12 by 12 room, or whatever size this room is. If I have a lawn that size, am I going to buy one of those grasshopper zero-turn mowers to mow it? Absolutely not. It would be a ridiculous waste of money. It would be absurd. I might just cut that grass with scissors. Yeah, if it's that small, like, does it even justify buying a push mower? I'll buy one of those manually operated ones that didn't even have, young people won't know what I'm talking about. We had one when I was growing up. And it was dull. It didn't work very well because it was old. But, I mean, you get my point. I mean, farmers, they take the money for these programs. My parents and many other farmers across America took money for these programs. And, what do you do if you get somebody who is a tyrant and who wants to just have power and likes to lord things over people, and they start using their authority in that office and their ability to bless and damn with regards to that funding, they start using it to try and pull strings on an individual basis. I'm not even talking about the program itself and the government, as the law is written and the original intent of the law or the policy or whatever was initially proposed. I'm talking about the implementation of it. And when you give power, more and more power and authority to bureaucrats and officials, many of whom who don't even get elected, they just get picked or hired, and then you can't fire them, you can't get rid of them, even if they're awful, even if they're abusive and capricious and dishonest and all the rest, even if they're incompetent and they don't show up to work and they don't do a good job once they're there and they don't have a good attitude. You can't fire them once they're in the government. Except this guy that my parents ran afoul of, he did get fired. He got escorted from the building by law enforcement. That taught me an important lesson. As we moved away from the county, as my parents sold the farm, because he didn't get removed in a timely manner, and he had just enough connections and power in the community to where, if he were to call in some favors to get us out of the picture, and who knows, even, once you back somebody into a corner who has some power and has the authority to, call law enforcement and have them trail you out to your own farm for 45 minutes to intimidate you. You haven't done anything wrong, but because you've called for an investigation of this guy, and he's got a buddy, you know, I was too young to know the ins and outs, but I mean, just hypothetically, that kind of thing happens. You know, you get a good old boys system where, you know, this guy's scratching that guy's back and covering for him, and you know, they're trading perks and all that kind of stuff. You know, my parents made the choice to get us out of there and get us to Ohio and to start over, and that was costly. And you know, I still, whenever I drive through the area where the farm was that I grew up on, it bothers me, and it is a reminder to me of why we have to be really, 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 really careful giving the government the power over us that we so often do. We're thinking of the cheese, we're not thinking of the mousetrap. You know, there's a saying, you know, the early bird gets the worm, but the second mouse gets the cheese. And you know, just think about that. When next time somebody proposes a critical infrastructure program, you know, and I'm thinking about this local House District 35 race, and you know, for all I know, all the people that were interested, if I end up naming and titling this and billing this as a video about Tanya Rost and Joel Crowder and this primary race for who's going to be the Republican for House District 35 in Montana. You know, if you dropped out at the 8-minute 42-second mark or the 14-minute 43-second mark, you know, you missed my endorsement here. But I want to talk about the principles. Let's talk about philosophically what is the nature of the choice that we're making, so that we're able to persuade people and talk to them and reason with them, not just for the sake of manipulating a vote right now, but for the sake of having convictions that have lasting power. You know, it's like I talk with my kids about, you know, if you guys ate cotton candy for breakfast versus some steak and eggs. You know, cotton candy has sugar. It's nothing but sugar, and that sugar, your body feels good. It burns that sugar very quickly, and then it's gone. And by contrast, you have some steak and eggs. Your body is going to burn that protein, the nutrients, the substance of that slower. You're going to have energy for longer. And so, you know, when we're talking about who we should vote for, you know, it's bigger than any one race or any one politician or any one single issue. We need to have a collective framework in our minds as we approach the options, which allows us to be judicious and to be consistent, and to make these important decisions with the long-term benefit of not only ourselves but our community in mind. And you know, Joel Crowder, he got my attention. I clicked like on his Facebook post about keeping Eastern Montana's cash cow well fed or taken care of, or whatever the title was for his Facebook post there. And he was talking about, you know, here we've got oil and gas. We need to keep tax revenue in the eastern side of the state instead of sending it over to the western side of the state, which is what has been happening, where the liberal environmentalists shut down logging and anything productive that got in the way, that obstructed the view of the mountains that the movie stars bought their $1 million homes for. The environmentalists shut all that stuff down on the western side of the state, and what do you know? Your tax revenue dries up, and all of a sudden you can't support the programs that all these people from California have come to love and expect. And so where do they look? They look to the eastern side of the state with people that are working for a living and have not torpedoed everything that's productive and economical yet. Yeah, so they start leaching and say, hey, your fruit tree's looking pretty good. We chopped our fruit tree down, or rather, we didn't allow anybody to harvest the fruit. And then you have these wildfires. That's another topic for another day, unintended consequences of people with supposedly good intentions running amok and preventing responsible harvesting of timber, of dead growth that needed to be cleared out, but some environmentalists decided you can't do that because it's going to upset the prairie grouse or some animal you've never heard of that was doing just fine for 1,000 years and still would be. Maybe it would be doing even better if a wildfire didn't come through its territory and its environment and just absolutely burn everything down below the roots level because it burned so hot and so fiercely because you refused to let anything be cleared out and logged and harvested. But anyway, again, topic for another day. So the western side of the state, they say, hey, we want that tax revenue. We need it. We need it. We're not going to survive without it. And the state government in Montana has listened to that siren song and taken entirely too much of eastern Montana's tax revenue and given it to the western side of the state. Picking fruit from our fruit tree and giving it to the neighbors who refuse to pick their own fruit and have made rules against picking their own fruit. And so Joel Crowder, he, to his credit, he posts this thing saying we need to invest in infrastructure in eastern Montana, fix up our roads and whatever else. You didn't get specific, not in that post anyway. But we need to be welcoming oil and gas development. We need to have an environment here which encourages and fosters development of oil and gas in our state. Otherwise, you're not going to have revenue coming in from oil and gas development. You're not going to have economic development coming in from oil and gas development. And that's a great point. I appreciate it. I think that that needs to be said. I personally, I wonder if I'd still be working for ConocoPhillips if ConocoPhillips had not closed their Sydney office. Here they talked for years about drilling in Richland County. Yeah, there's oil in eastern Montana. I started out in oil and gas operating wells in Richland County. I had a route of 30 wells, I think, when I transferred over to North Dakota. They were all older wells that had been drilled, years and years ago. Continental has an office still here in Sydney, Montana. I'm trying to think who else does. I don't know if anybody else really. It's a big deal. There's some smaller operators. No offense to the smaller operators, Continental has a big office. Conoco has some big offices. XTO, that's it. XTO has a big office. Sorry. But are we encouraging XTO to maybe move? They could take the sign off the front and lease that building out to somebody else if these eastern Montana wells, the tax environment, the regulatory environment is not conducive to them developing over here, and they could just move their headquarters over to Watford City, the way that Conoco did. And that's not good. It's not good for the state. It's not good for eastern Montana. It's not good for western Montana if they're expecting to use our tax revenues to supplement their lack of economic self-awareness. But so I clicked like on Joel Crowder's posts. And then I clicked like on his page, too, because I thought, hey, I saw him work as a defense attorney in one of these cases that I served as a juror for in the past year. And I thought he did a pretty good job. Didn't have any complaints about how he represented his client. But I didn't know anything else about him, and I just thought, he's running for Republican, and I don't know anybody else that's running for Republican, and I don't ever really pay any attention to local politics. I'm always looking at national politics and what's happening on Drudge Report. So, uh, I will note, I saw that Jordan Hall, pastor of fellowship here in Sydney, Montana, he had thrown his hat into the race for a little bit for this same House District 35 seat. And I did take note of that. That's probably when I first started paying attention. He's since dropped out. And this gal, Tanya Rost, entered the race. I think that's part of why he dropped out. And, I don't know her. I have a number of friends that have liked her page and that are friends of hers. So I hadn't seen anything and didn't, well, no, I take that back. I had clicked through just out of curiosity because I wanted to see, who my friends were supporting. And I saw some of the things that she had posted on her page, and I thought, that's good stuff. But I didn't take the time to really research the options too much. I rectified that this past week because one of my friends, Jeff Jorgensen, he called me. Lives in Savage, Montana. Great guy, great family, just wonderful people. And he called me. He says, he encouraged me to take a closer look at Tanya Rost's platform and to talk with her. And so I did, and he gave me her phone number, and I ended up calling her yesterday because I had some questions. Just hey, what are you hoping to accomplish if you get this? If you win this election, why did you enter the race? Tell me a little bit about your positions on things. And she was very generous with her time. Took a great deal of time to talk with me, answer some questions that I had. Had a great conversation with her. And I'll tell you what, she won my vote. I respect what I heard, even where I wouldn't necessarily have phrased it the way she might have, which I'm at a loss for anything that she said that I'm like, about. I was refreshed by her being very direct and saying, hey, this is my opinion. This is what I think. These are my priorities. These are my principles. This is what I stand for. This is what I would do if I was your representative in Helena. And in contrast, and I don't know this firsthand. I've just heard this from people who have observed, but Joel Crowder, when he's asked a question, particularly on the issue of abortion, Tanya Rost has the endorsement of the pro-life movement in Montana. Let me find it here. See if it comes up. Maybe not. I'm trying to remember the name of the organization. Is it Montana Right to Life? Montana Pro-Life? Anyway, should have had that ready before I started this video, I guess. Tanya Rost has the endorsement of this pro-life organization in Montana. Has a very, very clear stance on what abortion is and what needs to be done about it. That it is murder, and it is. And we need to make sure there's no money going to it, that if it can be banned, it absolutely should be, and it needs to be stopped. It does. The same way any other kind of murder, you could say it's none of our business. Well then, next time somebody breaks into your house and they're trying to murder you, are you going to call the cops, or are you going to say that's none of the cops' business? If somebody's trying to murder somebody else in this country, the law of the land is that is not okay. But we're not consistent. Once we start dehumanizing certain people and saying that we don't have to protect them when somebody's trying to murder them, we've gone to a very dark and dangerous place. And unfortunately, I'm not speaking in hypothetical. I'm saying we have gone to a very dark and dangerous place as a country, as a society, for the past 45 years since Roe versus Wade. Joel Crowder, you can look this up. don't take my word for it. CNN's blog from 9 years ago mentions Joel Crowder as incoming chairman of the college Democrats at Liberty University. And, that's well and good. Maybe I haven't asked him. I haven't seen him explain why he was the head of the college Democrats. Did you just wipe? Did you wipe boogers on my shirt? That wasn't very nice. How about that? How about you wipe boogers on Kleenex? Anyway, I'm obviously very pro-life, extremely pro-life. If there was one issue that would ever cause me to run for office, that would be it. To do something about that. And as far as I'm concerned, every other issue stems from that. And by that I don't mean abortion itself. I mean our attitude towards the unborn, our attitude towards the most defenseless, the most innocent among us, our children, our unborn children. This little guy, Enoch, he was in his mother's womb at a certain point. John, up until this past week, was in his mother's womb. To say that, when he was still in there, he was fair game to be murdered, and now, this week, now he's a person, you're making that up out of thin air. You're trying to invent a morality system arbitrarily. You have no support, not a leg to stand on, and unfortunately, because of Roe versus Wade and because of corruption in America, rot in our society and our culture, abortion has been allowed to continue for 45 years. To where what Hitler did with the Jews in Germany, what Stalin did with his own people, what Mao did with his own people, America has a body count with our own unborn children, which it ranks up there alongside those mass murderers. And if Joel Crowder isn't willing to go on the record, he puts it as one of the points for his campaign platform. If you go to his website, joelforrichlandco.com/platform, you can see, it says, Joel is focused on prioritizing the needs of Richland County, friend of the agricultural community, pro-natural resource development and keeping more money locally where the wealth is produced, defender of constitutional rights, pro-life, NRA member, Second Amendment supporter, fiscal conservative, pro-education, local control. So pro-life, if this is any indication of how highly he prioritizes these various things. Let's see, out of a list of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 items, 3, 5, 8. Pro-life makes number 5. So it's fifth in a list of 8. And that doesn't necessarily mean that, it's the 5th most important thing. But, it's not the top of the list, literally speaking. And from what I have heard, he has not gotten the endorsement of Montana's pro-life organization, and they have characterized his stance. What he means by pro-life is that he personally believes that abortion is wrong, and that it should be, something we don't do. Don't do that. But he personally believes that people should be free to have abortions if they so choose, if they need to. And, it's kind of a live and let die sort of approach, if that's the case. I guess that's not how I define pro-life. It's pretty ambiguous, pretty fuzzy definition there of what it means to be pro-life. You know, if that's what pro-life is, if that's, you know, what we need a different term. We're gonna need to be more clear. You know, if he can't be more clear than that, and isn't willing to go on the record with the pro-life organization here in Montana, doesn't want to be quoted or recorded because he wants to be able to change his position down the road, or he wants to leave it ambiguous so that he doesn't scare away Republican voters in this primary, so he can just get into office and then make that clear by his voting or not voting, being a bump on the log. You know, I don't get a good feeling about it. I don't. You know, by contrast, I talk with Tanya Rost, and she's very clear about it. She's absolutely, you know, even if you didn't like her position, you at least know where she stands. She's not ambiguous, speaking politicalese, and I respect that. And besides, you know, if you are pro-life, there's no question in my mind she's the person to go with. From having talked with her, she's got moral clarity on it, and we need moral clarity, and we need directness, bluntness. It needs to be a priority. It does. You know, it shouldn't be fifth on the list. You know, if somebody dehumanized you or me, and they said, you know, hey, I don't know if Garrett's really a human being. I don't know if you, the viewer, are really a human being. It wouldn't be such a tragedy if we just terminated Garrett, terminated you. You know, would you put, would you want the government putting it as their fifth priority out of 8 to come and protect you from being murdered or terminated? You know, focused on prioritizing the needs of Richland County. Such an ambiguous thing to say. You know, that's Joel's number one thing here. Prioritizing the needs of Richland County. You know, as far as I'm concerned, the needs of Richland County, the needs of Montana, the needs of the United States of America are that we remove this blot and blemish from our national character, from our moral fiber, this blot and blemish of abortion. And how we treat the most defenseless, the most innocent among us, absolutely is going to carry forward to how we treat anybody else that's under our power. You know, and you suppose, you know, a government official, you could have 2 kinds of bad government official that you don't want. You know, we'll use law enforcement. We'll use a police, good cop, bad cop sort of scenario. There's 2 kinds of bad cops. One is you call the cops and they don't show up when you need them. You know, that's a scary place to be if the Second Amendment infringers and all of them get their way. If they can ban guns and you're not allowed to buy a gun, you're not allowed to buy the ammunition, etc. Somebody comes, they're trying to hurt you, hurt your family. You call the police and they don't show up. And that happens in Detroit, Michigan. Call the police, they don't show up. Happens in Europe where they've got no-go zones for Muslim neighborhoods. You call the police, you call the paramedics, they don't show up. You know, that's one kind of bad cop. The other kind of bad cop is, you know, they're the ones coming and trying to do something bad to you, and there's nobody to call. There's nobody to save you from them. You know, and usually I think if we're thinking in purely partisan terms, Republican, well, at least he's not a Democrat. You know, do you want to elect somebody who's going to get in there and they're campaigning on being bipartisan? Well, what does bipartisan mean? If you were the head of the college Democrats, bipartisan might mean you run as a Republican even though you have the heart of a Democrat, and even though you have Democrat values and Democrat positions. And yeah, of course you have no problem working with the Democrats because you are one. You know, you don't have conservative principles, you don't have Republican principles. Or else, as with the pro-life thing, maybe we need to get more specific. We need to drill down on, or have a new definition, a new term for what a Republican is, for what a conservative is, to where you don't think you can just slip in there because it's become so watered down. Slip in there and run when these are not your values necessarily. You know, and And yeah, if Joel wants to clarify, if he wants to say, hey, this is, I'm willing to come out and be very specific about what it is that I am actually for and against, that's great. But, even in the case of oil and gas, I mean, that doesn't prove somebody's a conservative if they're saying that they support infrastructure projects in eastern Montana to encourage oil and gas development, production, et cetera, et cetera. If you go as a Republican and you're saying, hey, I'm going to bring back some goodies for my district. I'm going to bring back this new road project, this bypass, this repaving this street, widening this road, whatever. You go and do that. What happens when there's strings attached to that money? What happens if that results in increasing taxes? What if that's not fiscally responsible? What if that means an expansion of the government? I don't see anything in this list about reducing taxes, reducing regulatory burdens. Maybe he expands on that in some other place. But when I look at his platform, I see nothing about reducing taxes or reducing regulatory burdens. And as far as I'm concerned, and in talking with Tanya Ross, that's absolutely her goal, her aim, is that we need to reduce regulatory burdens and taxes. She speaks as a business owner, as a businesswoman, as somebody who comes from a ranching family, knowing how difficult it can make running a business, having a successful business, starting a business, when you've got stupid rules and too high taxes that are cutting into your profit margin. Let's go back to talking about that Brazilian chef, for instance. You imagine if somebody goes and they get into office and they make a law saying that you cannot make Brazilian food as a chef. You can only make French food. His specialty is Brazilian food. That's his niche. He's never going to cook French food, prepare French food, as well as this French chef. But boy howdy, he's a great chef for Brazilian food, and he's cornered that market. He saw an opportunity. He got into it. What happens when that Brazilian chef is faced with the law? Is he's trying to start up his own little restaurant, or he's starting this new thing. But the French Chefs Union has gone in and they've said, we've made a law. You can only prepare French food. How convenient for them, for the French Chefs Union. But how unfortunate for everybody that is never going to get to try Brazilian food now. And how unfortunate for this guy. That's his niche. And he's not allowed to ply his trade now. Imagine an alternative, too. This Brazilian chef, he says, nobody was coming for the first couple of years. That's got to be discouraging, obviously. But, nobody taking you seriously. Your revenue's not high. That's the case with most startup businesses. You're not rolling in the dough right away. It takes a couple of years of building up a customer base, getting name recognition, developing, fine-tuning your process. There's startup costs. You got to buy equipment. You got to invest in materials. You got to, and that it's a high entry cost, which low customer base, low name recognition, initially doesn't offset. So you've got to be prepared. Suppose this Brazilian chef he goes and he starts this restaurant, and it's going to take him 3 years to really get any traction, to get taken seriously. It's going to take 3 years for somebody influential, some food critic or socialite or whatever, to come into his restaurant, try his Brazilian food, and say, wow, this is really good. You guys all need to try this. You need to come in here. It's going to take 3 years, and before that 3 years is up, the taxes are so high, the rules are so burdensome that you can't do it. And I suppose too, the taxes are so high, regulations are so high, that you can't make sufficient money to save up and start that business to begin with. The way you encourage experimentation, free market growth, economic development is you reduce regulatory burdens where possible, not everything. You don't disconnect the brakes on your car, but you can't have them locking up either. The gas pedal needs to work. Reduce regulatory burden, reduce taxes. That's what Richland County needs. That's what House District 35 needs. That's what Montana needs. That's what every economy needs. That's what America was founded on, was self-government, right? You empower people by saying, hey, you can do this. I believe in you. Not by saying, hey, there's a bogey monster and the government is the only thing that can save you from it. Unless, with two exceptions, right? There's two exceptions. The core duties and functions of government are supposed to be national defense and, somebody comes over to your house, they're trying to break in and murder you. I like being able to call the law enforcement and say, hey, can you come help with this? This guy's trying to murder me or murder my family. I also solid Second Amendment supporter, and when I say that, I don't just mean that I like guns, but if you want to ban them, that's okay. I mean, I've got several firearms. I'm familiar with them, and if you break into my house, I might use one in a way that you find unpleasant. Anyway, nevertheless, I like that I'm able to call law enforcement. Those are the two core things that the government should be doing. All this other stuff, really negotiable. We shouldn't be dependent on the government. We shouldn't be addicted to government solutions for everything. And we shouldn't let politicians come in and insist that we're sick and the only solution, the only cure for our disease is giving them our money and power over us. And then we watch them take their cut, and then you have to rely on somebody to get in there and to do what they promised they were going to do. And if they were very vague and evasive, and they didn't make it clear what their values were, they were lawyerese in phrasing everything. They start making decisions that you don't like. It's not like when you're the captain of your destiny, you're the one at your driver's seat. You can make a course correction and say, you know what, that's not working. Some politician goes off and they start making some money and they get that taste for power, and then they move on up and up and up and up, and you can't get them out of there. And if it's not working for the people back home, they might not notice because they're too busy whining and dining and going to parties and hobnobbing and all the rest. And it doesn't, you voted. You can't put the toothpaste back in the tube once they're in there, or it's very difficult to. Much better, you vote for somebody who's clear and upfront about their priorities and their values. And if they're willing to say in the election, hey, this is what I stand for, these are my principles, these are my values, and to be absolutely clear about that, whether you like it or not, that says a lot. That speaks to integrity. I think about Donald Trump. And Donald Trump is a polarizing figure, and I get that. I didn't support him in the primaries. I thought he had a good chance. I thought he had potential. But I was a Ted Cruz, Rand Paul, Dr. Ben Carson kind of guy. And I would have preferred one of those three. But, once Donald Trump won the nomination, I think there's something to be said for him having the integrity to say what he thinks and to be honest. I think sometimes, what he says is not in good taste, but at least it's not so carefully massaged that he's saying nothing. That's what bothers me about politicians. They so carefully craft. They sit in these focus groups, and they put everything through this screen of what's polling well, What are the buzzwords that we need? You know, if we throw that buzzword in there, that ambiguous term that means nothing and everything all at the same time, depending on how you feel, depending on what you want to hear, you're hoping to hear. We throw those buzzwords in there, and then we avoid these little tripwires, the rhetorical tripwires. You know, that's not what we need more of. So anyway, I got to take this. It's an hour and 5 minutes anyway. Thank you. Have a good day. God bless.